Today, Boris Gelfand suffered a shocking defeat here in London. So the FIDE Grand Prix tournament has been blown wide open. Let's see what happened. He faced Alexander Grischuk, who had the white pieces, who opened with e4, his standard move. Sicilian from Gelfand. And now Grischuk played a sideline against the Sicilian. And I think this was an excellent choice. Of course, Gelfand used the Sicilian defence to great effect in his match against Anand earlier in the year. So he'd be so well prepared for the main lines. But against the sidelines, well, as we'll see, things didn't go quite so well. So here's this variation that Grischuk plays. This is quite tricky. I've played this myself, and what you're really hoping for with white is that black will play something like g6. Then you take on c6, and you actually play a kind of Grand Prix attack in this position. Actually, you can play f4 and knight f3, and there's no disruptive knight d4 in this position. This is a very attractive position for white to play. But okay, Gelfand wasn't born yesterday, and he played knight d4, their best move. And now most people play bishop c4 here, and this is also quite tricky. Although, you know, it's okay for black. But Grischuk played knight f3. Now one can take the bishop and play like this, and we reach a funny kind of open Sicilian where white has a lead in development. And I'm sure black is all right here, but it's tricky. It's a very tricky position because white has some initiative. Okay, Gelfand didn't want to get involved in that and simply played e6. Grischuk castled. And now a6, and that puts white's bishop on a slightly uncomfortable square. Of course, if you go to c4, then it'll just be driven away with b5, and e2 isn't the most beautiful square. So the bishop came back to d3, which looks very odd, blocking this d pawn. But what white wants to do sometimes is play either knight takes, and then the knight drops back to e2, or simply develop the bishop with b3 and bishop b2. So to avoid knight takes knight, Gelfand dropped the knight back to c6. You can play knight e7 here. You can also take here. These moves are respectable. But okay, knight c6 is also not a bad move. And now bishop e2. Now there was a bit of psychological warfare going on here because, of course, black could play queen c7 here and go into actually a very standard Taimanov variation. But Gelfand never plays like this. He never plays this variation. So Grischuk would have felt more at home in this position. So Gelfand wasn't going to allow that and played the knight back to d4. And Grischuk played bishop d3. Okay, so he's repeating the position, and Gelfand repeated. So it's pretty clear that Gelfand, leading the tournament, playing with the black pieces today, is quite happy with a draw. But Grischuk wasn't. He played for the win. He played b3. So we can see that, you know, maybe the bishop isn't so bad on d3 once the bishop comes to b2, but it is still a bit odd to block the d pawn. Now rook e1. And now I think a reasonable move for black is to play e5. This is quite solid. So the idea is to block out the bishop on b2. But white is probably a little bit better. For example, here, and this is a game between Trent and Ems, and you can see that white has the two bishops and a slight space advantage, but black is very solid. I think that's a reasonable way for black to play. Okay, Gelfand played bishop e7, and now comes e5, and this move makes sense of white's pieces. You can see the pawn on e4 blocks knight, bishop and rook, but by playing e5 that actually liberates white's pieces. So Gelfand exchanged. And now if knight takes, then the rook comes to a very active position indeed and can easily swing across to the king side, you know, in case black castles there. And these bishops, well, they look pretty tasty actually. I think, whoop, I misfired. They look very dangerous indeed. So this position actually has some poison for black. So Gelfand played bishop d7. Of course you could take this, but I don't think really black has any difficulties there once the knight just reaches the outpost. Although white has the two bishops, I don't think there's anything to worry about from black's viewpoint. Okay, let's go back. Bishop d7, knight e4. So this lets this one loose as well. So knight e4, very good move indeed. Black could try to block out that bishop with knight d4, but white has a very nice move here, b4, undermining the knight, and then takes and maybe rook b1. And this is a very tricky position. For example, black castles, you take and play rook b7, and white has a really potent initiative. This bishop is very dangerous pointing at h7. There are some very often tactics involving some kind of sacrifice on h7. Okay, back we go. So Gelfand exchanged pieces and played the bishop to c6. Okay, so he's managed to develop his poor bishop onto the long diagonal. But you can see that white already is very, very active here. And for example, if white tries to trade pieces off, well, this is a tricky position. Well, if castles, we can just take a pawn, and g7 is on prise. If queen takes d2, yeah, we take here. This is tricky. Okay, so rook c8 played. I think this is already a very uncomfortable position for black to play, actually. Now, I think queen g3 is quite possible. I rather like white's position after that. But Grischuk chose rook e3. Now, let's see what happens if black plays a normal move like castles. Well, that leads to disaster straight away, and we can see the point to playing rook e3. It's very crude indeed, and mate next move. What else have we got? Well, okay, Gelfand played b5, but what about exchanging off pieces? Well, again, this is tricky. Rook d3 is a really nice move. It's very unexpected somehow. And suddenly white is winning material. It's incredible the initiative that white has, actually. Knight d5 is possible, attacking the rook, but then we can plunge in and sack the exchange, and this is extremely dangerous. White has a pawn, the king is stuck in the middle, and two fantastic bishops. Okay, let's rattle on. b5 played, and now rook ae1. And this maybe is the critical position. I think Gelfand should try knight d5. I can understand why he didn't want to do that. It's extremely risky. And then Grischuk can choose between, for example, playing the rook back, okay, very simply, and trying to get some attack there. Maybe queen g3 is possible, just ditching the exchange, also very dangerous. Or indeed, bishop takes g7 is also possible. So, and again, it's an exchange sacrifice. So I can understand why Gelfand was reluctant to enter into this. He might win some material, but he would have to suffer for it. So okay, he chose c4, but I'm not quite sure what his idea was with this move. Grischuk took on f6. And now, well, probably, let me see. Well, okay, Gelfand took on e4. And now, here, I think he should have just castled. I think this is basically Gelfand's last chance. He's simply a pawn down in this position. But with opposite colour bishops, maybe there are some drawing chances here. That would be the compromise option. But here, I mean, who knows what Gelfand overlooked, but this is utterly disastrous, because after bishop takes pawn, black's king is just ripped to shreds. Gelfand must have missed a move down here, but it is absolutely hopeless. For example, if king f7, we play queen check. If g6, you just come back with the queen, and there's disaster on this square, for example, here. Well, actually, the tactics are quite nice. You take and play here, and you win the rook on c8 with a winning endgame. In the game, king d7 was played, and I mean, who knows? Maybe Gelfand overlooked queen g4, but this is completely crushing. Black's king is just caught up in the crossfire. If, for example, the king tries to run away with king d8, then rook d1 wins the queen. King c7. This is the game continuation, and now it's going to be mate on the queen side if the king heads in that direction, but this one wasn't much better. Threatening rook d6 check. King came back, and it's all terribly simple. And in this position, Gelfand resigned. If rook takes rook, for example, then you just win the rook with check, and it'll be mate shortly after. So a disaster for Gelfand today, actually. I mean, who knows? Maybe he's getting tired. But that left the situation in the tournament very open indeed, because Mamedyarov defeated Dominguez. So Mamedyarov leads with 6 out of 9, and then 3 players are half point behind on 5.5. Gelfand, Grischuk, and Topalov joins them on 5.5. He defeated Ivanchuk today. So things are hotting up. And a word about Hikaru Nakamura. He suffered his 4th loss in a row. Michael Adams beat him today. It's tough at the top. Thanks for watching.